Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Metzia Ayin Vav Bava Metzia 76. Today's Daf Yomi, we start a new chapter called Hasocher Es HaUmnin, that Es HaUmanin, that one who hires workers. It's dedicated on this Yom HaAtzmaut. It's dedicated for a Shmira for Am Yisrael, Hatzalah for the Shvuyim, Yeshua for the Chayalim. So the chapter deals with hiring workers. Hasocher Es HaUmanin. And Uman is a person whose job it is to do work. Could sometimes refer to a day laborer, and sometimes refer to a craftsman, sometimes refer to a contractor, to a person who's hired for a job. So we're going to see what it means in the context of each case in this chapter. So one who hires these craftsmen, v'hituzets, or these workers, and they tricked each other. Who tricked whom? The Gemara is going to discuss. The Mishnah says they don't have a formal legal complaint. They only have a moral complaint, meaning they could whine, they could cry, but they can't get any money after they were tricked in this particular case. Gemara is going to have to explain that. Sachar sachamar, that's a kadar. So let's say you hire a donkey driver. Rashi says in this case, a kadar means a wagon driver. Mohavi priprin, to bring periaprin, to bring these beams for the chuppah, or chalilim l'kal or mace, or to bring these foods for the bride, or for a rachmana litzlan levaya, funeral, upol and la'alos pishtanim min hamishra, or workers to raise up the flax from that was steeping in the pot before it gets ruined. The whole davar sha'aved. In all these cases, if you don't do it, you're going to lose the opportunity. And then you hire these workers, and now what's going on here is that they change their mind, and they're leaving. So basically, in all these cases, the workers say that they don't want to do this work anymore. Malcolm she'ein shem adam. So if there's nobody else there to do it, meaning say you can't find workers for the regular price, so and adam, then what you could do is you could hire people who make even a higher salary and force them to pay, because otherwise the thing is going to get ruined. Matan, or you could trick them into coming back and doing the work. The Gemara is going to say how you could trick them. Basically, you promise them that you're going to pay them the higher fee, but then you don't. Hasocher es ha'umanin. And so now the Mishnah tells us another halacha. Let's say you hire the workers, and then they started to work, and then and then the workers, after they did half their work or a portion of the work, they decide they don't want to work anymore. Yadam al tachtona, and those workers get the lower hand. And basically, what this means is that even if the price of labor at this point changes, so if the price of labor goes up and you have to hire more people to complete the job, then you only pay the workers after the initial workers after you deduct the salary that you paid to the later workers, and then they only get their reimbursed after you deduct what the later workers were paid. But if the price of labor goes down, they don't get a higher percentage. The initial workers still don't get a higher percentage. They're capped out at what they had agreed to. So they can only lose in that situation. In Bava Metzia there, on top of Ayin Vav Amud Aleph, if the landowner is the one who goes back, then Yadu al Tachtona, and he's the one who gets the worst arrangement. It means to say he has to pay them their price, the higher price if the labor went up, but if the labor goes down, basically, if the labor goes down, he has to give them the wages according to what he had initially agreed to. So, and then the Mishnah says, "Kol Mishana, whoever is the one who changes, Yado al Tachtona, he has the lower hand." And this talks about a case where you gave money to a dyer of wool to dye something red, and he switched it on his own and dyed it black. So there, in that case, if the improvements were greater than the expenses, then you don't have to pay him for the improvements, only you have to pay him for the expenses. But if the expenses were greater than the improvements, then you only have to give him for the improvements and you don't have to pay for the expenses. So therefore, the person who changed has the lower hand. And whoever reverses has the lower hand, whoever leaves. The Gemara is going to again explain that. So first, in the Gemara, yes, yeah.
Where are you?
I am Vav Amid Aleph 76a at the top. I am Vav Amid Aleph. We're now up to the Gemara there. So the Gemara says, initially speaking, the Gemara is bothered by the word hituzet, that they tricked each other, which implies that two workers tricked each other. Not that the Baal Bayis, not that the landowner tricked the worker. So in this case, the Gemara says, Chazur is Ebazeh, Wo Katani. It doesn't say that the worker or the landowner tricked each other. It says that they tricked each other, meaning to say the atu poem adadi, which implies that the workers are the one who tricked other workers. So what's that talking about? What's the scenario? Normally, Balabaya is that the landowner said to his contractor, Zil Oger we poalim, go hire me some workers. And then the contractor went va'atinu, and he tricked the workers, and so therefore all they have against the balabayas is a tarumas. They only have a complaint. They don't have a legal claim. So what's the case? What's the case we're talking about? Let's say the balabayas, the landowner said that. Let's say the landowner said, I want to hire you. The landowner said to his contractor, hire me workers for 4 seah a day. And the contractor went to the workers and Amar Lahu, and he said to them, Bitlasa. Then he says that I have a landowner who wants to hire you for 3 a day. So if that's the case, Tarumas Maya Vidase, Savar Vikapio. What complaint could they have against the landowner? They accepted the price. So what complaint could they possibly have? And said, if the landowner said 3, and the contractor goes and says to them, he says to them, I want to hire you for 4. Again, what's the scenario? If the contractor said, I'll pay you the 4, then he has to pay them himself, the Tanya, because we have a similar case in the price. You hire a worker so special to work in your field. Instead of showing him your field, you show him your friend's field, and he works it. You have to pay the full wages. And then he has to go claim the money from the landowner whose field he actually worked on. How he benefited him. So in this case, the contractor would have to pay them 4, and then he could go fight with the landowner and say, you have to give me 4 instead of 3. So what's the scenario where we say they only have a taroma? So the Gemara says, no, it's Tzricha da Amar Lahu, that the contractor said to them, he said the Baal Bayis is going to pay you 4. And then they did the work, and the Baal Bayis said, no, I'm only giving you 3. I only said 3. Well, in that case, all they have against the Baal Bayis is a complaint. The Gemara says, well, why do we say that? Why do we say they only have a complaint? We should see how much would workers typically get paid. And if they typically get paid 4, then that's what he should have paid them. Meaning to say that if you do the work in your field, you're entitled to be benefited for it. Even though the Baal Bayis had initially said only 3, if they went and did the work, they should be entitled to fair compensation. So the Gemara says, no, what we're talking about is the Ika de Magar Ba'arba, the Ika de Miskar B'Salasa. In that town, there were some who worked for 4 a day and some who worked for 3 a day. The Amrulay that they said to him, if you didn't tell us that you were going to hire us for 4, we would have gotten other people to hire us for 4, and so therefore you have to pay us 4. And so therefore they have a complaint against him, even though they don't have a legal complaint, they have a moral complaint. And alternatively, what we're talking about here is the Bava Metzia. Here, what we're talking about is that the workers have their own land, that they're not just day laborers, they're actually choshev people, they have their own land. That's what we're talking about. The Elav, the Amrislam Arbor, they said, if you hadn't promised us such a high wage of 4, then we wouldn't have hired ourselves out for a mere 3. We were landowners. We would have held out for the higher wages. Alternatively, we're dealing with workers. The Amrile, we say to him, Kivan the Amrislan Ba'arba, and then we're dealing with workers who say to him, since you told us that we were getting 4, we did extra good work. So now that you're only going to pay us 3, we have a complaint against you. The Gemara says, but if that's really the case, let's look at that work to see if it really was good that they could have such a complaint that they're entitled to 4. And the Gemara says, no, but Rivka, they just dug a hole in the ground, and so it's nothing to look at. Rivka Nami made the Yadis. The Gemara says, no, you could check out the hole, see if it's a good hole. Gemara says, no, the Molimaya, it's already been filled with water, so we can't see if they did everything properly. We don't know at that point. Or Ibayis Amor, alternative explanation, that the Balabayas said, pay that, hire me workers for 4, and the worker and the contractor went and hired them, and he said, I'll give you 3, and that and you say, well, what's their complaint? They accepted it. No, they could have a complaint against the contractor because they say to him, you didn't follow the approach of don't withhold good from its master. Meaning to say, we were entitled to 4. Why did you not give us the best opportunity to make a living? You held back on us on the deal. So that's a complaint that they have against the contractor. They don't have a legal claim, they just have a complaint. Pshita, the Gemara says it's obvious, it's obviously the case that if the landowner said, I'll pay 3, and the contractor goes and says the landowner is paying 4, and they said, Kamosha Amar Balabayas, they said, yeah, we'll agree to what the Balabayas said. In that case, it's obviously the case that they intended to get 4, and they can have a tarumas, they can have a complaint against, meaning to say that they think that they should have been entitled to 4, they could have a tarumas. But what about the case where Amrei Balabayas Ba'arba? Let's talk about the case where the Balabayas says, I want to pay 4. And then the contractor goes and he says, Bitlasa, and he says, I have a guy who wants to hire you guys for 3. And they said, Kamasha Amar Balabayas. And they respond, we'll do what the Balabayas said. They thought they were told the Balabayas said 3. The Balabayas really said 4. And they said, we'll do what the Balabayas said. So what's the case there? Are they relying on what the Balabayas said, and therefore they're entitled to 4? The Amrile Mahamnaslan, the Hachi Amar Balabayas, they're saying we believe you that that's what the Balabayas said. Odilma Dibur the Balabayas Kasam, meaning to say, are they saying Kamash Adibur Didei Kasam? Are they relying upon the agent said? And they're saying, we trust you that that's what the Balabayas said, that the landowner said 3. Or perhaps they're saying, no, we don't care what you're saying. We're going to rely on what the Balabayas said initially, and we'll find out what he said. And he said 4, and so therefore they're entitled to 4. Tashmar, so how do we answer this question? We have a case of a woman who wants a get. A get is a divorce, and the halacha is that you could have a divorce brought by an agent. Now, the agent could either be an agent of the husband, that's called a shliach halacha, that the agent brings the get, and then when the woman gets the get into her hands, she's divorced, or the agent could be an agent appointed by the woman, and that's called a shliach lekaboa, an agent to receive the get. And then the second the agent gets the get from the husband, she's divorced. So let's say a woman says to her agent, Haveli Giti, bring me a get, meaning to say, go to my husband and tell him that you want him to be a shliach for halacha, to appoint him an agent to bring the get to me. But you're not my shliach kabbalah. You're not accepting the get from me. You're bringing it to me. And then this agent goes to the husband and he says, Ishtecha Amra. He said, your wife told me Yiskabeli Giti. Your wife told me to accept the get, meaning to say, your wife said I should be an agent for a kabbalah. V'hu omer helech, and the husband says, helech kamasha amra, go do like she said, meaning to say, okay, you're the agent for Kabbalah. Now the husband can't appoint him to be an agent for Kabbalah. Only the wife could, but the wife wanted it to be an agent for halacha. And now this guy gets the get from the husband who thinks he's an agent for Kabbalah, and he brings the get to the wife. Then we say, under those circumstances, even if she gets the divorce, she's not divorced. Even if she gets the get, she's not divorced. Shmas, we know we learn from here that we're relying upon what the agent said. Because if you think we're relying on what she said, that when the get came to her hand, she would have been divorced. So we see relying on what the agent said. So when he says do what she said. So therefore, in this case of the landowner says to the contractor, hire them for 4, and the contractor says hire them for 3, and the workers say we'll do like the owner said, means that they're intending to accept upon it for 3, and they don't have a tarumas. So the Gemara says, no. Amar Rav Ashi says they're not the same case. It says Rav Ashi on the top of 76b. Hachi Asha, you think the 2 cases are the same? Bishlama Yinmar Ipcha, it would have made sense. You would say that the 2 cases are the same if the Gemara had quoted Rav Nachman in the opposite scenario. That what Rav Nachman said in name of Rav Baravu Amarav, if he had said the opposite, his Kabbalah Gita, he said that if a woman had said to her agent, go and be my shliach Kabbalah, go and receive the get on my behalf, and then the agent goes to the husband and the agent says to the husband, Ishtecha Amra Haveli Gita, your wife said that I should be your agent, V'hu Omer Helech Kamosha Amra, and he said, go bring it just like she said. V'Amar Nachman Amar Abavu Amar Rav Mishayagia Get Liyado Migareshes, and there Rav Nachman said that once the get gets to her hands, she's divorced. Amada Dibura Didaka Samech, because there we're seeing that it's and if Rav Nachman had said there she's divorced, we're saying we're relying on her words because we're saying that when it gets to her, she's divorced. Or inami, or alternatively, mishigia get liyada, or alternatively, if Rav Nachman would say once the get reaches her hand, she's divorced. Mishigia get liyada migareshes. That would prove almadal dibura dideka samach, that she's not divorced once the agent gets it. She's only divorced once she gets it. It proves that he's relying on the words of the agent, and he's a shliach for halacha. Ela hasam, but in the case that you cited, what's the reason why it's not valid? Maybe it has nothing to do with whose words you're relying on, but rather it's mishum da akar shliach shechuse legamri, that the agent completely abandoned his initial appointment. He abandoned the reason for his appointment or the guidance because the Amrei shliach kabbalah have Havina lo lacha lo havina, because the woman said, I appointed you to be my agent to the Amrei shliach kabbalah havina, because the woman said, it's as though he's saying, I will be a shliach kabbalah. Even though the wife appointed him to be a shliach halacha, the agent saying, I'm ready to be an agent for receiving the get, but not for halacha. So therefore, he completely uprooted it. So that's why it doesn't work. It's not necessarily an indication of whose case he's relying upon. Ibayas Ema. So now the Gemara goes back to the initial case when it says in our Mishnah, Hituzet said that they tricked each other. We had said 5 answers that it was the workers were tricking each other, but now the Gemara is going to give a different answer. When it says Hituzet said, it's not necessarily between the two workers. It's possible Haitanu Chazar Namu Hitu Karle, that it's possible that it really we're talking about a case where the worker and the owner and the landowner are in dispute. And even though it uses the language of Hitu, and it should have really used the language of Chazru, but nevertheless, our Tana of our Mishnah, the word Hitu is actually here means chazru, that they changed their mind, and we know that's possible because it's a brisa that says the following, and we're going to see at the beginning of this brisa that they use the word hitu when it really means chazru, where the worker and the owner change their mind in the middle. Because what's the case? As socher es ha'umanin. Let's say you hire workers, the hitu es balabayis. So let's say you hire the worker, and the brisa is going to switch scenarios several times, so you have to follow it. You hire the worker to be a day laborer. The hitu es balabayis, and they trick the balabais, meaning to say you hire the worker to do a day job, and then he changed. The worker goes back and he doesn't do it. Oh, balabais hito son, or the owner of the land goes back on them. Well, since they didn't do any work yet, they don't have a legal complaint. They only have a moral complaint. But when do we say that they don't have any real complaint? They just have a moral complaint. They don't have a legal complaint. That's only the case, that they didn't actually go and spend any time traveling to the place where they need to work. But let's say the donkey drivers traveled where they were told to pick up grain, and they didn't find any grain. Or Poland, where the workers traveled to the field, and then they found they found the field was not workable because it was wet. No saying then he has to pay the full day's work. Then he has to pay the full day's work. But, says the Brisa, and you'll see that they're qualifying the statement that they get a full day's work, but you can't compare and you can't compare a donkey driver who has to come with a full load of grain to one who's coming empty. Or you can't compare somebody who's doing a full day's work to somebody who's just sitting around doing nothing. So basically, they don't get the full day's pay. They just get the pay of how much would a person be willing to take to not work for the day. When do we say that this is the case? When do we say? But now we're switching the scenario. We're no longer talking about day laborers. We're now talking about a kaplan, a person who's hired to do a full job. So when do we say that they only have a tarumas against each other? So where the workers didn't start the job yet. But however, but let's say they started to work. Then, and this goes back to the case that we're discussing in our Mishnah, but this position argues with our Mishnah. But if they started to do their work, we look at what they did and pay them for their work. Ketzad kiblu kama l'tzor b'shnei selah. Let's say they accepted upon themselves to harvest for 2 selah, and kitzaro chatzia, and then they only cut half. V'nichu chatzia, and they left aside half. Or beged oreg b'shnei slime, where they said we're going to weave the garment for 2 selah. Argu chatzia v'nichu chatzia, and they only did half. Shamalan masha asu. Then we just evaluate what they did and pay them for them. Hayayafa shisha dinarim. Notes and let's say the price of the work went up. Then basically under those circumstances, let's say the price went to their 60 dinarim that the guy still has to pay, even though they only did half the work, meaning say price went up 50%. Still, you give them either a selah or they finish their work. Meaning, say it argues with our Mishnah and says even though they switched in the middle, the workers get paid exactly like they had initially agreed. The imselah, and if it's exactly the price, no selah, then you give them, you give them exactly 1 selah, which is obvious. So the Gemara is going to have to explain what's the chiddush of this part of the brisa. But that position argues with the position of our Mishnah. But Rabbi Dosa is going to agree with the position of our Mishnah. He says Shamalan Masha Asid Lios. No, we have to look not on the basis of what they've done, but what's still left of the work remaining. Hayayafa shisha dinarim. If the price went up to 60 dinarim, no lam shekel, then basically we only give them the amount, assuming we only give them a shekel, meaning to say that since this person has to pay 50% more, we take out the difference from their paycheck. No, and we pay them less. Or they finish the work and they get exactly what they initially contracted for, the two seller. If there's a seller, have to give them a seller. But when do we say that this is the halacha? But when do we say that according to Rabbi Dosa, the workers that when do we say this? That according to the Rabbanan, they get according to what they paid, and according to Rabbi Dosa, basically whoever changes has the lower hand, b'davar shein avod, by something that's not going to be lost. It's not something that's going to break. B'davar avod, but if it's something that if you don't fill it in right now, if it's time sensitive, then you're going to lose everything. Then sochar alein ometan. Then you hire more expensive workers to finish the job, or you can even trick them. Kates and Matan, how do you trick them? You make a claim. I'll give you. I had given you one seller, but both time come and take. I'll double your wages. And then afterwards, you say, "Sorry, I only said that because you were going to leave me high and dry and with the work unfinished." How much can you hire them to do? 40 and 50 zuz, you up to 40 and 50 zuz, you can pay to get it done. So, when is this the case? Bisman shein shampoo and laskor. When can you pay up to 40 and 50 when there's no other workers to hire? But there are other workers to hire. And the guy who's leaving says, "Go hire from these." Then he only has taromas. He can't hire the more expensive workers. He has to hire those the going rate. Tani Tana Kamei de Rav. No saying them schar mishalim. So the Tana who taught it in front of Rav says you pay them the full wages if they showed up and there was nothing to do. Amar le Habibi. So Rav said, my uncle Rabbi Chia said, Ilo ana avai, if I was there, lo avai yavinan lahen ela kapol batal. I wouldn't have given them the full wages. I would have only given them what a worker was paid. To how much would you be willing to take to not work today? That meaning to say, my uncle Chavivi said, if I would have been there, I would have given them a reduced rate, and you're saying you give them the full wages. So the Gemara says, "Va'ala katani." We don't understand why Rav is asking this question. But the Brisa concludes, "Eino doma abalaton ton." But didn't the Brisa conclude saying exactly like Rav Chia said? So why is Rav challenging them? Rav Chia said they shouldn't get the full wages. That's exactly what the Brisa says, that they shouldn't get the full wages. So he said, no, in fact, the person who was saying the Brisa in front of Rav didn't actually complete this Brisa. Or alternatively, he did complete it, and Rav was adding this. No, my uncle Reb Chia said, if I would have been there, I wouldn't have given them anything, because I wouldn't have given them anything at all, because they didn't do any work. And you want to give them like a reduced wage. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, how could Rabbi Chia say he wouldn't give them anything when the fact that the Brisa says that you should give them like a worker who doesn't show up? So the Gemara says, it's talking about two different scenarios. One is where the worker was able to view the place the night before, and then he should have known, basically should have anticipated that it wasn't going to that it wasn't going to be a good day there, that the field was wet. Then under those circumstances, he doesn't get anything. But if he wasn't able to see it, then he gets paid like a worker who's being paid not to work that day. A person who hires workers to plow the field or to hoe the field, and then the rain comes and fills it up with water. If he had filled it up, if he had visited the field the night before, say to the poem, then it's the worker's fault. It's their bad luck. but he knew he went into the deal. But if he hadn't gone the night before to check it out, say that the Baal bias. That's the owner's loss. So you have the Lukapol bottle, and you have to pay him like you pay him the wages of how much you'd pay a worker not to work. All right, we'll stop here. God willing, pick this up in the coming days as we start Hasocher Es Almanin.
Thank you.